There were 6 of us who knew. Now there's one, me. That's the first thing you have to understand about this before anything else makes sense, that I'm the last. The other 5 are in the ground, everyone, and I've buried 4 of them myself, stood at 4 graves in 4 different kinds of weather and thrown 4 handfuls of earth and thought. Each time, now there's one fewer of us who knows, and the secret gets heavier on the one still standing. Because that's how a shared secret works. It's like carrying a long table. 6 men, it's nothing. 5, you feel it. By the time you're down to 2, you're staggering. And one man alone holding up a table built for 6, that's what these last years have been. I'm old now. I won't see another winter. The physician won't say it, but his face says it for him. So I'm going to set the table down. Finally, I'm going to tell you the thing the 6 of us carried for 40 years, and then I'm going to die, and it won't matter anymore who knows, because the only thing the secret was protecting is finally safe. Let me start with how we became 6. 40 years ago there was a king. A good one, and I don't say that lightly. I've served under the other kind and I know the difference in my bones. King Adelmer. He was the sort of king who learned the names of his guards, which sounds small and isn't. He knew mine. He'd nod when he passed, and once when my mother died, a note came down to the barracks in his own hand. 3 lines. I have it still. I'll have it on me when they bury me. He had a son. Young then, a boy, really 8 or 9 when this began. Prince Edmund. And he had enemies, the way all good kings do, because a good king is an inconvenience to a great many people who profit from a bad one. The enemies were inside the walls. That's the part that still cools my blood, not some foreign army, the council. His own council, or enough of them. Men who decided the king had grown too soft, too fond of the common people, too slow to make the cruel, profitable choices they wanted made. They couldn't move against him openly. He was loved. So they did what such men always do. They worked in the dark slowly to surround him, to fill the posts around him and his son with their own people, so that when the moment came, every hand near the crown would be their hand. King Adelmer knew. That's the thing the histories don't have. He knew they were closing in. He could feel the net drawing tight around him, could see his loyal men reassigned one by one and replaced with smiling strangers, and he understood that he was being slowly cut off from everyone he could trust, inside his own palace, by men he couldn't openly accuse. And he understood that they would not stop at him, that the boy, Prince Edmund, was the real prize. A child king is a puppet. If they could take the father and hold the son, they'd have the kingdom for a generation. So the king did a quiet, desperate thing. In the time he had left, before the net closed all the way, he found 6 men he was certain of. We were nobodies. That was the point. Not lords, not captains. The conspiracy was watching the lords and captains. We were ordinary guards, low men, the kind nobody bothers to suborn because nobody thinks we matter. A gate guard, a stable guard, 2 corridor men of which I was one, a man from the kitchen's watch, a groom who carried a sword. 6 men so far beneath the notice of the great that we were, for that exact reason, the only men in the palace the king could trust. He brought us together once. Only once. At night in a place I won't name even now, even dying old habits, 40 years of them, you don't shake them at the end. He came to us alone, the king of the whole realm, with no guard but us, the 6 nobodies, and I have never in my life felt anything like standing in that room, and understanding that the most powerful man in the kingdom had no one left he could trust but us. He didn't make a speech. He was past speeches by then. You could see the exhaustion in him, the particular gray exhaustion of a man who's been afraid for a long time and is tired of being brave about it. He gave us a thing to keep, a message, sealed, and he gave us an instruction, and the instruction was the whole of our lives from that night forward. The message was for his son, for Prince Edmund, but not for the boy he was, for the man he would become. The king said, and this is close to the only thing he said that I remember word for word, because it's carved in me. He said the message was not to be given to Edmund until Edmund was grown and crowned and standing on his own feet without their hands on his shoulders. Not before. However long it took, even if it took the rest of our lives. Because, and we understood this without his having to say it, if the message reached the boy too early, while the conspiracy still had its hands around him, they'd take it. And whatever was in it, whatever the king needed his son to know, would die in their hands. The message could only do its work if it reached a free man, a king in truth, not a puppet. And there was no telling how long that would take. It might be 10 years. It might be 40. It was 40. The king died within the month. They said it was his heart. Maybe it was. I've never let myself be sure it wasn't, and I've never let myself be sure it was, because a man can drive himself mad living in that gap, and I had a job to do that required me sane. He died, and the conspiracy moved exactly as he'd known they would. They took the boy. Not violently, they were too clever for that. They simply surrounded him. A regency, they called it. A council of wise heads to guide the young prince until his majority. Every wise head their own. And the boy Edmund grew up exactly as the king had feared. Inside a cage so gentle and so total that he didn't even know it was a cage. Raised by his enemies to be the kind of king they wanted, with their hands on his shoulders from the day his father died. And the 6 of us watched. That's the part nobody could have prepared us for. The watching. We'd braced ourselves for danger, for a desperate dash, for handing over the message in some dramatic midnight hour. We hadn't understood that the assignment was patience. That we would have to stand at our posts for years, for decades, watching the boy grow up wrong, watching the conspiracy win, watching the kingdom slide into exactly the shape the good king had died trying to prevent. And do nothing, because the one thing we had, the one weapon, could only be used once and only at the right moment, and the right moment was nowhere in sight. You don't know what that does to a man. To hold the cure in your pocket and watch the patient sicken for 20 years because you know that giving the cure too soon means watching them snatch it from your hand and pour it out. We aged at our posts. We grew old being nobodies, which was the disguise that kept us alive. 6 unremarkable guards, getting gray, getting stiff, never promoted, never noticed. 6 men the great ones walked past for 40 years without ever once wondering what we carried. We had a system. I'll tell you because it's the part I'm proudest of, the small clever human thing we built. The message itself stayed hidden, its location known to all 6, so that no one man's death could lose it. And we met. Once a year. Every year on the anniversary of the night the king came to us, we found a way to be in the same place for the length of a meal. 6 aging guards who'd somehow stayed friends across the decades, which is exactly what we let everyone believe we were. Old comrades having their yearly drink. No one ever suspected that the yearly drink was the most important meeting in the kingdom. 6 men confirming, each year, that the message was safe, that the moment had not yet come, that we would carry the table one more year. And one by one, the chairs emptied. The stable guard went first. His heart like the king's, 15 years in, we were 5. Then the man from the kitchen's watch in a hard winter, a cough that wouldn't leave. 4. The 2 corridor men, my brothers, the ones most like me, the ones I'd stood beside longest, they went within a year of each other, and I'll be honest, that was the worst of it, burying the 2 who'd carried the table closest to me, feeling the weight lurch onto fewer shoulders. 2 of us left. Me and the old groom, the swordsman, the last 2 who knew, 2 ancient men at a table built for 6, drinking to 4 ghosts and a dead king, and a secret that had outlived almost everyone it was meant for. The groom died 3 years ago. And then there was me, the last man who knew. I thought it would never come. That's the truth I'm ashamed of. After the groom died, alone with the secret, so old I could feel the end of myself approaching, I thought, it's going to die with me. 40 years, 6 lives, a king's last desperate hope, and it's all going to come to nothing because the moment never came in time, because Edmund grew old a puppet and I'll grow dead a failure, and the message will rot wherever it's hidden, and no one will ever know there was a message at all. I made my peace with that, or I tried to. A man tries to make peace with his failures at the end. It's most of what dying is. And then the world turned, the way it does, suddenly when you've stopped believing it will. The old conspiracy, it had ruled through Edmund for 40 years. But conspiracies are mortal too. The men who'd surrounded the boy king had grown old alongside us and started dying off the same as we did. And the ones who replaced them were lesser men, greedier, clumsier, and they fell to fighting among themselves the way thieves always do once the strong hand that ruled them is gone. And Edmund, old Edmund now gray, a king who'd been a puppet his whole life, Edmund finally in his last years slipped the strings. I won't pretend I understand exactly how. I was a guard, not a courtier. I saw it from the outside, from the posts, the way I'd seen everything for 40 years. But it came clear over a season that the king was acting on his own at last, dismissing men who'd held him captive his whole life, standing for the first time on his own feet without their hands on his shoulders. The exact condition the dead king had named, 40 years before, grown and crowned and standing on his own feet without their hands on his shoulders. The moment had come, 40 years late, and there was only one of us left to recognize it. I almost missed it. I want you to know that, because it's the most human and most frightening part. I was so old, so far inside my own dying, so long past hope, that when the moment the king had described finally arrived, I nearly didn't see it for what it was. The thing you wait 40 years for, you stop being able to recognize because you've stopped believing in it. I had to argue myself into it. I had to sit alone, an ancient man, and reason it through the way the six of us would have reasoned it together once. Is he free? Truly free? Are their hands off him? Is this the moment, or is this a trick to draw the message out? The same question that other guard asked in that other story about the footage, the same 2-second fork, except mine took weeks, because I had no one left to ask, no 5 other heads, just my own failing one. I decided it was real. I decided it the way you decide the most important things, not with certainty, which never comes, but with the readiness to be wrong and live with it. I decided that an old king finally free in his last years deserved his father's last words even at the risk that I'd misjudged it, because the alternative was letting the message die with me out of caution. And I would not be the 6th man to carry the table for 40 years only to drop it at the door. So I took it to him, the message, after 40 years. I won't tell you the whole of how an old guard gets a sealed 40-year-old message into the hands of a king who's surrounded even in his freedom. It took the last of everything I had. It took calling in the only debts a nobody accrues, small kindnesses done across decades, a kitchen door left unlatched, a name remembered. The kingdom never saw it. The kingdom never sees the things that matter, but I got it to him, into his own hands, the way the king made us swear. Here is the part I can give you, because I was there for it, the only one of the 6 who lived to be there. I was allowed to be present when he opened it. I'll never know, I think he understood, looking at this impossibly old guard who'd appeared from nowhere with his father's seal, that this was a thing 40 years in the making, and that the man who'd carried it had earned the right to see it land. He looked at me a long moment. An old king and an older guard, both of us near the end, the only 2 people in the room who knew the weight of the thing between us. He opened his father's letter. I don't know everything it said. He didn't read it aloud, and I wouldn't have asked, and most of it was a father's, not a king's, private, the last words of a dying man to the son he knew he was leaving in the hands of his enemies. But I watched his face read it, the way I'd spent a lifetime learning to read faces from a distance, and I saw 40 years move across it. I saw the boy he'd been arrive and the old man he'd become. I saw him learn at the very end of his life that his father had known they were taking him, had not abandoned him to them carelessly, had spent his last strength reaching forward across 40 years to put a hand on his grown son's shoulder and say, I saw what was happening, I tried. I never stopped trying. I loved you, and I trusted 6 men to wait however long it took to tell you so. That was the message, not a battle plan, not a secret heir or a hidden treasure or a name to be avenged. I'd half expected across 40 years that it would be something like that, something that would change the kingdom, undo the conspiracy, set the world right. It wasn't. It was a father telling his son the truth. You were not abandoned. You were loved. The cage was real and it was not your fault, and I knew. And I am sorry. And I am proud of you for getting free at last. 40 years. 6 men's whole lives. To deliver I love you, and it wasn't your fault, to a man who'd spent his entire reign believing, somewhere underneath, that his father had simply died and left him to the wolves. I used to think we'd failed, you know. All those years watching the conspiracy win, I thought the message was a weapon we'd never get to fire and the kingdom was lost, and the 6 of us had wasted our lives guarding a thing that came too late to matter. I was wrong. It came exactly when it could do the one thing it was always for, not to save the kingdom, to save the man. To let an old king die knowing he'd been loved by his father, instead of dying believing he'd been left. We didn't fail. We just didn't understand for 40 years what we were actually carrying. He wanted to reward me. Of course he did. He was weeping by the end of the letter, this old king, weeping in front of a guard, and he wanted to give me, I don't know, everything. Lands, a title, gold, the whole useless weight of a grateful crown. I asked him for one thing instead. I asked him to let me tell him their names, the other 5. The stable guard, the kitchen watchman, the 2 corridor men, the old groom. The 5 who'd carried the table beside me and died before the moment came, who'd given their whole ordinary lives to a secret and got nothing for it, not even the seeing of how it ended. I asked the king to know their names, to hold them, the way his father had held mine when my mother died, so that the 5 who didn't live to see it would at least exist. Once, in the mind of the king, they'd saved without his ever knowing. He let me. He sat, an old dying king, and he listened to an old dying guard say 5 names and 5 small things about 5 nobodies, and he held them, and he promised me he'd remember, and I believed him, because by then I'd learned to read when a face is telling the truth. That was my reward, not the lands. That the 5 who carried the table got their names spoken, once, to the man they carried it for. The king died not long after. At peace, they say. I choose to believe the letter is why that he went knowing he'd been loved instead of guessing he'd been abandoned. That's worth 40 years. That's worth 6 lives. I've decided it is, and I'm the last one who gets a vote, so it's decided. And now I'm setting the table down. I'm the last man who knew, and soon I'll be no man at all, and the secret has done its work and doesn't need keeping anymore. There's no one left to protect it from. The conspiracy is dust. The boy king is dust. The father king is 40 years dust. The 6 of us are 5 graves and 1 old man telling you this so that it doesn't vanish completely when I follow them. That's the only reason I've told you. Not for me. For them. For 5 nobodies who gave their lives to wait, and a king who reached 40 years across his own death to touch his son's shoulder, and the simple, terrible truth that the most important message in the history of that small, forgotten kingdom was not about power at all. It was a father saying, I'm sorry, and I love you, and it wasn't your fault. We carried that for 40 years, 6 of us, and it arrived. That's the whole of it. That's the secret. Set it down now. My arms are tired and I've held the table long enough, and I'm ready at last to put it down and rest.